Are are we live? Yes, we are live. Hello, everybody, and welcome to a classic Saturday stream, which, as many of you can see today, is going to be a lot more talking Dungeons and Dragons. And today we will be continuing on ahead with our big streak of story times. But before we get into all that, how is everybody doing? I've heard a few good reports on some nice weekends coming through. Oh, Ubu, I see you're here now. Got the whole gang running in real early today. Seems like y'all got a pretty free Saturday going. Is that true? Is that what's going on? Just finished my dinner, actually. Oh, hell yeah, Ubu. What'd you end up having? I'm in charge of making myself something a bit more decent tonight. So I'm going to try my hand at something called pan stew. Basically like making a stew, but you're just doing it in a skillet. I've not done this before, but I've got a couple of recipes up, so I think I'll be able to muddle my way through to get something that's at least edible, you know? Essentially, I have some stew beef left in the freezer. I need to find something good to do with it. Oh, but not only that. This morning, well, last night it came in, but this morning I had a little more interesting fun with it. Last night, I finally got a delivery of a blender that I had been waiting on, and ended up making myself a few strawberry daiquiris last night. Yes, Marcial knows. And ended up getting a few drinks in and playing some League of Legends. That ended interestingly. I won't say well, because that would be lying. But I won't say badly, because I at least had some fun. So this morning I woke up and just made myself a basic strawberry smoothie, and honestly, I've been enjoying that quite a bit. Probably going to be hitting myself hard with strawberries for the next few days, just because. Oh my god. I don't know about all you guys, but fucking strawberries are my jam. And a fresh fruit I like to eat. Jam or fresh fruit, you know? Either or. Was 3 strawberries good? 3? 3 strawberries is good, though. I could always use more. Does playing League ever not end poorly? I would say when you have a serious amount of fun, even when you lose. That's when League is not ending poorly. Just ending with a loss. But, but, but. Oh, having some meatloaf, Ubu. Nice. Well done. Looks like we've got a lot of people rolling in today. The dad pun killed me. Yeah, well, I gotta find a way to get revenge on you all for all the deaths you inflict on me. Looks like we're at 21 so far on our Mass Effect playthrough, but that's all behind us for today. Do you make strawberry shortcakes? Never made a shortcake before. I have had strawberries on an angel food cake, but that's about it. Xenaku! How are you doing? It has been some time, I think, since I've seen you rolling around. And I think with that surprising in, I'm good to kind of swap us on over. Start getting everything lined up for today's story time. As today we'll be diving into a tale I like to call Skittering Nightmares. But, before we start story time, as you guys know, I've lurked a bit, but not been in chat for a little while. Okay, Xenaku. That's no problem. I never want to pressure anybody into chatting. I do appreciate it, but if you're enjoying yourself just kind of watching or just listening while you're focused on something else, I have absolutely no problem with that. But I'm glad to see you're still around. Before we get into story time, I think he ignored us because he knows we were right. No, I ignored you because I know you're wrong, crazy. There's no need to add in a +1 because that had nothing to do with either my gameplay or y'all affecting me. If I had been distracted by chat, that'd be one thing. But an electronic failure is not something I'm willing to count here. You all will have to keep track of that yourselves if you want it. But before we get into story time, as you all have seen the past few weeks, we have been going on quite a string of pure story times. Mostly, I think that's because I know you all really enjoy kind of getting the whole party's tale, and we have quite a few more streams ahead of us before we're anywhere near caught up. So I am super happy to be continuing on ahead. But as it's been a little while, I just want to remind everyone out there, if anybody watching now in a VOD or on the archive is so interested in getting my opinion on any of your own homebrew materials, settings you're making, classes, subclasses, magic item, races, anything at all, I'm always more than happy to respond to any direct messages, whispers, or comments left on anything when it comes to Dungeons & Dragons homebrew material. The Accorded Dragon's finally online? Hell yeah, Marcial. Remind me at the end of the stream, and I'll pop that up on screen for people to see. But if you are so interested in just hearing my personal opinion or things you want to know, please message me at any time. I will never hesitate to respond to any Dungeons & Dragons questions, whether it's based on lore, homebrew, my own personal house rules, or anything at all. If, however, you would like to submit some stuff for, as some of my past streams have done, getting shown off to more people, so you can see all of chat responding, giving their opinions, reactions, or thoughts on ways to make things clearer, make things more interesting, or what may or may not be balanced, please let me know in a message as well. I love showing off people's homebrew materials, and if no one else is going to be submitting some, there's going to be a point where in the future I'm going to have to work on creating some stuff to show off again. And for many of you, what that will mean is sometime coming up, we might have to do a deep dive into my homebrewed language, if that's what we can call it. A custom language I made for a particular group of raiders within my own setting. Something I made for a little bit of fun, but I got a little out of hand with. Now that the greetings and welcomes are knocked out of the way. Okay, we'll throw in a kick. Let's see here, do I have the kick here? 1 second. We're on a bit of a scene that I don't normally get a lot of redeems on. Yep, there it is. Hey, Woodbogus! Glad to see you rolling in. And just in time, as we have finished off the greetings, finished off my announcement welcoming anyone to send me any material they'd like my opinion, or chat. What kind of talking ass bullshit is this? Not quite to that level, but it sounds like I will have to look ahead and try to figure out a good day to show off the language of the Scarpy. But with all of that, I'm going to have to ask all of you to a teaser for the custom language. Remind me at the end of chat, or at the end of the stream, because once we're through the story, we might have a little bit of time that I can give a teaser to some things. But, chat, going to need all of you to come in, take a seat, warm yourself by the fire, and try to ignore the sounds in the night. Don't let your eyes wander to the dancing shadows, to those strange scratching noises. For nightmares lurk ahead of us, and will be coming out very quickly. Before we can greet them, though, we must all be standing on even footing, which means a bit of a recap for all of you. So where were we on our hero's journey? Back in the capital of Aethin, the city of Corella, the party had finished a pair of jobs that left them open and free. when they encountered a group of mercenaries. A corpse that had been left behind on one of their trails, it seems, had belonged to this band of men who were seeking to return home. All right, Darness. Ara. Ara. The men in Corella told the party of their home, Taverfia, far to the north. Not so far, but far enough. That had been entrenched in warfare with the Grand Duchy of Athrone right along its border, though Taverfia had been losing land for years now. This group of mercenaries decided to run south, start their own little adventuring group, and make money off of the battlefield. But now rumors stir of a mysterious figure, simply called the Judge of Pelor, who had shown up some months ago and began to turn the tide of the war. These men now wish to return home, to find a new place, and to fight for their home's freedom again. However, the description of this man mostly grabbed the attention of Tortuga Lochran, the elvish monk, brought back memories of a home long since lost. Agreeing to guide these men on their return home, the party prepared themselves and eventually set off on a trail, heading across all of Aethen to the city of Bargoy, the last stop where the trail splits, going along two different paths through the kingdom of Koshia, one through the mountain trails dipping into the Authorial Valley, the other heading the long way around the mountains through all of Koshia, and eventually carving its way to Taverfia. The party's trail first would take them to a small village. Here they would hear stories of creatures haunting the woods at night, and agreeing to help the villagers would head into the woods, eventually discovering the ghouls that began to attack all who moved through this land. The party made quick work of them with the use of the godlike powers of Pharaoh, their cleric, received a small amount of payment, and spent the night partying. During that night, however, Tortuga would find himself alone in the woods, thinking of the darkness around him, of the trail he was taking, and the man he would seek out, who bore the banner of his long-since burnt home. In his time alone, Tortuga was visited by a strange figure he had seen sometimes. A man dressed as a master of the monastery Tortuga had trained at, though a figure he did not recognize. The man would approach Tortuga and begin warning him of the dangers of following one's darker impulses, of feeding a bloody hunger, whether it be for revenge or any form of violence. Through this conversation, Tortuga would slowly learn that this strange figure he could speak to sometimes bore the fangs of a vampire. That night would draw to the end as the party would reconvene in the tavern, find themselves a place to sleep and rest for the night, making ready the next morning to continue along the path to Balgoy. And with that, our recap is ready. The pieces are set. Tortuga is racked with memories of a home burnt to the ground as he stalks the rumors of this Judge of Pelor, bearing a banner that reminds him all too much of home. However, unbeknownst to the party, ever since they left Corella, there's been another figure on their trail. An elvish woman named Valandria. Sent by Aquila Andrana, a past benefactor of the party, to deliver a message. Aquila had agreed to carry it, though, as Valandria gets closer, the questions in her mind have less to do with this party and more to do with the lost friend, the dead woman that the party had found. For Valandria sought answers about what happened to Anna in the woods. With that, I think we are all caught up, all ready, all prepared for the next part of our tale. Though today I want to ask the question, how are you all feeling? Are you prepared? Is there anything you are lost on or any clarity you need before we continue? For from this part of the story onward, there will be monsters, dangers, and a great deal of confusion. So I would hate for anything from the past to be the cause, instead of what lies ahead. So, chat, are we feeling ready? Caught up? Is there anything you need? Any questions need answering? Or any assurances I should make that will allow you the full breadth of what comes next? Take your time, but we will only be pausing here for a minute before the tale will begin. My body is ready, Eric. Someone hold me before I begin to shudder. Oh, Marcial, no. Get the fish. Yes, get the fish ready indeed. Yeah, no, sorry, I didn't get good sleep last night. I think I'm gonna go to sleep. That's sleep. I barely slept for 5 days. Alright, Destroyer. Get yourself to bed. It is safer there, after all. But beware the nightmares that come, for they might hold more power than you know. And don't worry. Everything will be either in a VOD or on the archives soon, so you will find a way to catch up. Hopefully, in the full light of day. Now. Our tale begins with no more delay. Good Nacht und schlaft gut. Gute Nacht. In the morning, the party prepares their wagons and horses. Riding up, mounting about, they and the mercenaries are up at first light. They had decided to delay themselves here in the village so the party might perform their job and earn a little extra coin. But with that means time to be made up in the morning. Everyone mounts their horses and prepares the continuing path. Now, as the road begins to arch, not just eastward but northward, they continue, riding straight through the town of Tarmor Arnis. They continue ahead, marching all throughout the day, straight through noon, not stopping until late at night, when they arrive in the town along the river, Balgoy. Here is the border town of the kingdom of Aothen, and their last stop within the land of the elves. For them, the party faces 2 trails. The first is the main highway that leads around the mountains to the east, through the center of the kingdom of Kosha, traveling nearby their capital, before eventually cutting westward back into Tefurfia. It is a well-traveled road, one that many know, and that is always safe for traders and the like. But due to its traveling all the way around the mountain pass, going nearby the capital and only at its end, cutting hard to the west, this path will likely take the party a full 10 days, if not longer, to travel, especially now that they are selling their horses in Balgoy. The other path that awaits them, though, is much shorter. A trail that should take them 5 days, perhaps, of consistent movement. Given Malachite's experience as a mountain trekker, they might even be able to take even better time here. However, the path is not as well traveled, particularly in recent days. It is known to be somewhat dangerous, especially as it travels through the mountains. It cuts out of the pass that belongs to the kingdom of Kosha and dips into the Authorial Valley, the ancient enchanted woodland that was the origin of the elves and the source of much Feyan influence. However, the party convene and speak with the mercenaries, and while there might be some danger on the trail, together they are a group of at least 10 people with decent combat training, with a skilled mountaineer on their side, and with the decision to sell the horses already made. The party decides to take the western road, the mountain pass, to cross through those dark, hidden ways, through the mountains of Kosha, dip momentarily into the Authorial Valley, and to quickly arrive in the land of Taverfia. With the evening already in hand, and the decision to sleep at a local tavern made, the party split up to resolve their jobs, some of them moving to the tavern to arrange for the evening's rest, some of them taking the horses to a nearby tradesman. They had only been bought for their dash across Aethin, and moving into the mountains will not provide any additional speed. So the party members find their way to a trader in beasts of burden, and barter for a price. However, they first decide to press this tradesman for a bit of news about the mountain pass. Any news coming through that way? Seems to be the main connection between Taverfia and here. I was just wondering if any tradesmen have been coming through of late. There's any news about the road? Rasmussen asks. I'm afraid not. Recently, there have been almost no travelers coming through the mountain pass. It has been some time since there's ever been a large number, but over the past couple of weeks, no one has come that way at all, which is a bit strange. That news in hand concerns Rasmussen, but as he carries it to the rest of the party, everyone thinks things should be mostly fine. If anything, this is decent news. Running into fewer travelers means the party's watch can be more certain of what they might encounter in the night. Knowing something approaching is a threat can be a lot safer than having to ask friend or foe. With the last night's sleep in Aethin, Malachite, small ranger, mountaineer of the party, is faced with a moment in dreams. Looking above her, looking outward, she sees a stained glass window directly above her, showing the figure of a quartz-like crystal, a large gem, wrapped in flowering thorned vines. The colors reflect, and in their beauty she reaches up As her hand crosses into her vision, she sees tiny fingers, chubby hands. Strange. She tries to sit up, but finds herself too weak to fully rise. She glances about and finds herself laid in warm blankets and soft pillows, though surrounded by a tight cage of wood all about her. Looking about the room, she sees a massive door, larger than any she's seen before. It is strange to lie on these massive blankets in this massive room. But then the door clicks and opens. In walks old elvish woman who fits every thought that comes to one mind when they think of the word crow. An elderly elf with graying hair and a sour face approaches the crib in which Malachite lays. Looking up at the woman's face, Malachite tries to give a scream, a warning, a bellowing call. But all that comes out is the distressed wailing of a babe. The woman's face sours more as she looks down at Malachite. I will not have you ruining my family's standing, you disgusting whelp. I have done what I needed to ensure your mother will not insult us further. But for you, this will be the end. The woman's clawed hands reach into the crib, drawing Malachite up into her cold grip. And as she rises, Malachite awakes in a start. Looking about, she is alone in her tent. She settles in and finds sleep again, her mind reeling from that strange fantasy that seemed to conjure from nowhere. The next morning, the party gathers together and prepares to head along the road. Faced ahead of them is at least 3 to 4 days crossing through the deep mountain passes, often referred to as the Gorge of Kosha. This mountain way takes them high over the valley of the Ethereal Woods, but sets them low between many mountain peaks and cliffsides. They prepare everything they need and begin the trek out of Balgoy. It is only a few hours' travel before they feel the path sloping upward sharply as they head into the mountains. It is a few more hours before they reach a momentary campsite, the last place from which they can see the Ethereal Wood. Looking out from the top of this mountain pass, they see the vast canopy stretching on for miles to the west, and then the distant peaks of Polamont further beyond. They pause a moment, looking at those ancient woods, feeling the malicious energy trying to reach into the mountains. The party turns and heads between two large stone cliffways that mark the beginning of their journey. As they start entering into the high-walled pass, the party continues their movements, though they pause for a moment as the light begins to fade. The deeper into the mountains they go, the more they learn why this place is called the Gorge. The high cliff walls that go on either side of this narrow roadway block out all sun except for the few hours directly around noon. They are bathed in long shadows, all light snuffed out. Each day they will face only about 4 hours of sunlight. Into the darkness, the party walks and begins this strange trek through the land of unending shadows. Unknown to them, back in the city of Balagoy, a rider has just entered. An elvish woman, going by the name Valandria, brings her horse to a stop in the city center. She knows the party was heading to Diverfia. The job she is on has stated as such, but here is where the first choice that they were faced must be made. Will they go through the mountain pass or take the Koshin road? Valandria knows which way a smart person would take, and so spends only a small amount of time in the city. She finds herself a nearby barn or stable that seems to possess quite a few horses, and sets about to make sure her horse is well watered and fed. There is a long road ahead of them to go around the mountain trails. Here she begins a conversation with the horse salesman, asking a bit and prying for information on the party she is seeking. She is shocked into silence when she hears that they have taken the western road and will be going through the mountain path and eventually crossing into Authorial. She asks the man for more information and soon learns that no tradesmen had been coming through the way for over a week. Valandria quickly mounts her horse and heads out of the city, looking upwards to the mountain pass. In horror, she stares. Who are these people she is tracking? And what sort of idiot would take this route? Kicking her heels into the haunches of her horse, she rides like the wind, darting upward and after her quarry. The first day of traveling through the gorge was a massive adjustment for the party. Some familiarity for one of them. The rest are set in a state of discomfort. Rasmussen, the only dwarf of the party, had been raised underground, and the pressing feeling of the rock walls on either side of him do not bother him at all. In fact, there are moments where he begins to forget that he is traveling through the mountains and begins to feel more like he is in the caves of his homeland. That is, until he looks directly up and sees the light and clouds far overhead, unable to bleed down to sway away the shadows. In this darkness, the party feels disquiet, concerned, a creeping feeling of unease. It is eventually brought to an end at noon, when the sun finally arrives directly overhead and the light pierces down into the gorge, finally filling it with sunlight. The party now feels like they walk a tight road, but this only lasts for a short time. After a few hours, the light immediately begins to fade, as if heading into the earliest night the party could know, but only the shadows that strain overhead. Ayo Live D&D, I'm afraid we're simply telling the story, Folan, though I've decided to put up a few visuals to help. As the dark shadows begin to stretch once again, the disquiet returns to the party. That feeling of being trapped underground in an infinite night in shadows. begins to weigh on them. Suddenly, Tortuga's head turns to the side. Out of the corner of his eye, there was a flurry of movement, wasn't there? Tortuga finds himself staring into the deep shadows of the gorge, watching for any movement. But none come, until out of the corner of his eye, back along the main road, sees it. The shadows dance for a moment, and he turns his head wildly. But there's nothing there. Looking about, Perch sees many of his traveling companions' eyes darting to and fro. They all seem on edge. This bird's perch on edge as well, as he begins looking about. He sees nothing in the dark, but he watches as Rasmussen jumps for a moment, staring at a strange shadow at the foot of one of the cliff walls, before he shakes his head and continues on. Something is off here. Pharaoh finds herself silently praying to her God for safety, for guidance, a comfort, really, simply a mantra to help relax her mind. In the middle of her prayer, though, she hears the soft sound of something climbing on stone, nails scratching against its surface, finding purchase and moving. A small dart of movement out of the corner of her eye. Pharaoh looks up to the top of one of the cliff walls and goes pale. Hanging from the cliff face is a strange figure, seemingly hung by its feet, upside down, its arms held wide, its face a skull, having been rended of its flesh. Pharaoh points, turns back to Rasmussen beside her, and says, "Do you see?" As she looks back, though, there's no corpse hung from the wall, no faceless figure. Simply a small area of white discoloration in the stone. "I'm sorry," she says. "I thought I saw someone." Their journey continues in the dark. Occasionally, one member or the other will glance straight up and try to judge the time by the amount of light reflected off of the clouds above, until eventually the darkness is all-consuming. There is no real sign within the gorge that night has fallen, but as they look up and see the small reflecting stars above, they know it is time to make camp. Silently, without much conversation at all, the party sets up their campsite. Tents, campfires. They set themselves against stone walls, eating their meals in concerned quiet, their eyes occasionally darting upwards like they have seen something. But nothing seems to stay. As eventually people begin going to bed, Tortuga and Rasmussen volunteer to take first watch. They stand up and stretch themselves about, stoking a fire to reflect as much light in the area around them as possible. Pharaoh and Malachite head to bed. Perch finds himself seated near the wagon, staring. Unknown to most of the party, Perch finds he needs very little sleep at night, and as such decides to silently watch. His concern has grown over the course of the day, as all of them seem to become more and more on edge, something he has been unable to notice. He is on edge, but not from movements or sounds, but because the people he's traveling with seem to see something he does not. Night beats on. The darkness feels like a heavy weight laid upon Rasmussen and Tortuga as they keep close to the fire and look out into the darkness. I don't want to come across as crazy, Tortuga, but I need to see that during the day I saw. Did you see movement? Aye, and the shadows, like there's something following us, but just out of sight. Aye, that I did. The two look about, relaxed a bit, knowing they are not insane in what they have seen, but concerned. Suddenly, Rasmussen stands up, weapons in hand. Tortuga didn't see anything, but his nervousness gets the better of him as he grabs his bowstaff and stands up with Rasmussen. Rasmussen peers into the darkness. He had just seen it. Something that seemed to appear in the shadows for just a moment. A pair of glowing eyes that immediately turned upon him staring and disappeared into the darkness. But now there's nothing. As he's staring, Tortuga begins to hear the sounds. Strange, chittering noise echoing throughout the gorge, going up and down, fading in and out. Then Tortuga closes his eyes and listens with greater intensity. That strange chitter suddenly becomes a consistent scratch. Claws, repeating again and again. Taking his bowstaff in hand, Tortuga opens his eyes and then walks into the darkness in the direction of the scratching noise. Well, hold on now! Don't leave me alone here! Rasmussen says as he darts after Tortuga, leaving the fire. Perch stares at the pair of them. They seem to be jumping at nothing, hearing something that isn't there. Perch watches as they both walk into the dark. Tortuga eventually finds himself staring at a cliff face, looking up at it. As he approached, the scratching became silent. Looking about the wall, he then sees it. Something irregular in it. Or rather, something very regular. Hey, Ras, do you think you could give me a bit of a boost? Tortuga asks. Well, I suppose. Why? I see something up on the stone wall. With that, Ras gives Tortuga a bit of a boost, as Tortuga makes his way up the stone wall about 10 feet. He looks how it looks like a perfectly bored hole into the stone wall. He sees the markings of claws on the strange hole. He presses his eye, focuses his mind as he looks into the hole, and sees just behind it a very tiny crack in the stone. A cavern would be a very gratifying name. A space, maybe a few feet long, less than a foot wide, less than a foot deep. It's just a small pocket in the stone, a pocket of air that has cracks running out deep into the mountain. Perhaps some sort of tunnel that a very small creature might move through, but no, this little area doesn't connect with anything. Perhaps a small worm or beetle could squeeze between the cracks, but there isn't enough space for a creature large enough or strong enough to burrow through stone to fit into. Tortuga comes down from the wall and begins looking all about on the ground before he finds a strange pile. A gray pile of dust, powdered stone. He holds it between his fingers. This seems to be the remnants of that hole that was dug, pushed outward. But what could possibly do this? Turning about, he and Rasmussen begin returning to camp. I'm gonna give everybody just a bit of a check-in one, right? Tortuga nods, returning to watch, looking about more intently now. There is something here. But what could it be? Rasmussen first checks in on the mercenaries, taking a quick moment to peer into each of their tents. He sees one of them is tossing and turning in his sleep, but beyond that, they seem fine. He then begins checking on the party members, one by one, until he arrives at Malachite's tent. Here, Rasmussen takes a moment to peer in and sees his small green friend has sweat through her blankets. They are soaked entirely. She is turning and twisting in her sleep, a look of fear and agony on her face. Rasmussen mutters in, Malachite, are you alright? Malachite, wake up, he says, approaching. He kneels by her and starts shaking her, to no avail. Malachite, wake up! Wake up! He says, shaking her more violently, speaking louder. Tortuga hears the sound and begins heading towards her. Rasmussen is shaking, but Malachite seems unable to wake from her dreams. Malachite awakens in a familiar place. Crib with a stained glass window directly overhead. The image of a corpse wrapped in thorny, flowering vines. She feels the fear begin growing. She does not want to be here. And as she thinks this, she tries to stand up and finds her legs stretch outward, snapping through part of the crib. She begins to sit up, and as she does, her weight breaks the legs as the crib collapses onto the ground, falling flat. Looking down at her hands, they're small, but not that of an infant. "Will you get up, you lazy girl?" says a voice from the doorway. Looking up, Malachite sees her. The old woman that ran the orphanage. Well, the slave house. "I'm sorry. I'm getting up," Malachite says, as she stands in the mess of broken wood that was her crib. Looking overhead, she sees the stained glass window, the fancy ceilings and vaulted appearance of this room she is in, contrasted against the simple, rough wooden door ahead of her. "Well, get a move on! They need you at the kitchen, you lazy girl," says the woman as she grabs Malachite's arm and wrenches her from the room, out into the old wooden hallway of the slave house. She feels the smack across her face as the woman screams at Malachite for being a useless, lazy girl. Malachite looks down at the ground, fear overtaking her. She apologizes again and again.
Well, don't say you're sorry. Simply get yourself to the kitchen, girl.
With that, Malachite nods and quietly heads down the stairs, taking the slaves' quarters the back ways. She eventually arrives in the kitchen. She looks about a moment, wiping the tears from her face, collecting herself. As a young boy of 12, Ajax runs up to her. How are you, Malachite? All right. Did she yell at you again? Yes. Well, don't worry. They need you to cut the roast again, so it should be an easy evening. Malachite smiles. In this place, she has been beaten often. Whenever she messes up, she has found herself to mess up quite a lot. Malachite is not a very coordinated person, not well educated, not great at courtesy and fine, dexterous acts. Her owner had many times talked about needing to get rid of the girl and her uselessness, until the day a talent of hers was seen. For what she lacked in the ability to greet cordially, to sew, to clean, she possessed with knives and blades. Malachite's unparalleled strength for her age allowed her to wield the heavy carving implements used to break down many of the larger roasted beasts with their thick hides or armored interiors. As such, Malachite became a bit of an entertainment oddity, brought out by her owner on special occasions to carve down large roasts with the two-handed blades that they would require. As Malachite looks about, she finds the freshly sharpened implement in front of her, takes it up in both of her hands, and looks about for the chef. She finds him, a large furball who kneels down. Everything will be okay, Malachite. It is a simple boar roast today, he says, showing her the pig stuck on a massive spiked plate so that it might stand perfectly upwards. It was Malachite's job to slice it down along the pieces and to serve. I will warn you, though, there are very important men out there. Welcome, first time chatter 312772. Welcome to our Dungeons and Dragons story time. Please do settle in. Though, I want to know, are you a first time watcher? Or are you a lurker who's been tempted to speak? Malachite nods as she joins the men carrying the large boar out to the table. Sat about it, she sees military men of Polamont, all dressed. All dressed in the uniforms, showing different ranks of officers. And there are many, many important men here. Her master is likely seeking some favor. So she has been brought out as a major entertainment. Malachite takes up her implement and climbs the step ladder set beside the table in front of the roast. Looking about, all of the men enjoy a quick chuckle between themselves, but grow quiet at this small girl holding two-handed an impossibly large blade. Malachite looks about the table, her eyes first resting on her master at its head. He looks smug, proud of himself for some recent bit of entertainment, likely. Looking all around, though, Malachite's eyes stop as they meet a pair of bright blue eyes. Directly across from her is a man that she would come to learn was named Felix Augustus. He was dressed more simply than many of the others here, wearing a regular uniform, his insignia of rank seemingly left behind. As Malachi stared, the cold blue eyes looked into hers and seemed to peer through, measuring. Something about the man unsettled her. Throughout her life, Malachite had been judged by many people. It was a constant state when one was a slave here. But this man's judgment was so different, so deeper, like he was looking for something where others believed they already saw it. This man was seeking it. Closing her eyes for a moment, Malachite takes a deep breath and begins the show of carving the boar, slice by slice. The chuckles and the mutterings of conversations grow silent as everyone stares at her perfect movements, absolute dexterity, and unprecedented control of the heavy implement. Malachite makes near instantaneous work of the beast, pulling apart piece by piece. As she falls into the rhythm, her eyes open again, and she looks at the impressed silence all around her, until her eyes are caught again by those wells of blue. Every other eye here is impressed for her master to have acquired such a talented slave. But the man in front of her seems to still be judging, looking. And then he smiles and nods. And in that moment, Malachite loses grip of the blade and sends a meaty chunk of gristle scattering across the table, bouncing off of the man's plate and landing directly in his lap, sending pig grease all over his uniform. There is an uproar from the end of the table as her master bellows his anger. Standing from his seat, he darts across the room and strikes Malachite, instantly send her reeling across the floor. I am so sorry, my dear Legionary General Felix. The slave will of course be punished, and we will see to cleaning your clothes immediately. I cannot believe such a horrid thing has happened. The man holds up a single hand, and Malachite is shocked at the moment of fear on her master's face as he goes instantly silent. There is nothing to apologize for, sir. A simple mistake. I am more than fine. Felix slowly rises from his seat and looks down at Malachite. It has been nearly a decade since this had happened. Malachite knows exactly what comes next. If this slave is such an inconvenience to you, my sir, perhaps as an apology, you shall make her a gift to me. Please, my lady, do stand. You made quick work of that boar. What is your name? This was the moment Malachite's life had turned, for she had been freed from the slave house and been brought in as a retinue member under the Legionary General Felix Augustus, one of the most powerful military men in all of Pulamont. But the words did not come. His eyes cold as ice. Felix looks at her and says, "Yes, isn't she useless?" You should get rid of her, however you see fit. The cold words dig deep into Malachite's heart, and the room is filled with a cold wind that extinguishes the fire, the candles, making everything dark, save for the two blue glowing eyes across the table. Chittering begins filling the room as Malachite rises and looks around. More blue glowing eyes stare at her from every direction. Then one candle is lit. In the reflection where Felix once stood is a massive insectoid creature with gnashing mandibles, antennae, and glowing blue eyes. It chitters at her, reaching out its slashing claws. Malachite leans backward, lashing out with the blade in her hand. Suddenly, a claw pinches her left arm, then her right. Her master is gone. Another insectoid staring at her. Then more. The whole table is filled with them. As they draw in towards her, she feels her limbs gripped, lacerated, as she is lifted up over the roasting spike. She is picked up and stretched out over top of it. Looking down, she sees the meat spike pointing up at the table at her. Then it disappears from vision as she feels herself slammed down, being impaled through and through. The wind is knocked from her as the blood splatters from her mouth. The chittering moves in as the mandibles begin closing around her. "I said wake up!" Rasmussen screams as he strikes her across the face. Malachite comes to in her tent, soaked through with sweat, pale to the bone. She leans over and pukes a dark green ichor onto the bed, her mind racked with pain. "Glad to have you back. I thought something was happening, but it looks like you're awake. How much of a nightmare did you?" Malachite looks all around, feels the burning sensation on her face. What happened? "You were having some sort of nightmare. I seemed to have lost you for a moment." Looking around, Malachite finds herself safe with the party. No insects, no memories. "It's nothing, Ras. Just a bad dream," she states. "Oh, all right then. How about you try to get a bit more sleep? Tortuga and I will stay on watch." She nods. She goes back to bed, into a deep, dreamless sleep. The next morning comes, the gorge still filled with darkness, as the light will not pierce it till noon again. Everyone gathers up their stuff and prepares the wagon, though Malachite is notably sluggish this morning. She seems to still be sweating, rather profusely for having just woken up, a sickly look on her face. She drags herself from her bed, sluggishly prepares everything, and begins the trek through the gorge. Making their way, Rasmussen keeps his eye on Malachite. She seems to be in a bad state. Perch, however, glances back at the mercenaries and sees one of them as well. Seems to be making a very slow day of it, trekking along, but sweating profusely. He makes his way up to the wagon and begins asking Tortuga a few questions about what happened last night, and learns that Malachite seems to have had a very bad dream. He makes his way back to the mercenaries and asks them about their friend. They said he simply had a rough night's sleep, bad dreams and all, but he'll be fine after tomorrow. Perch's mind begins to wander. What is happening? Noon comes, and the gorge is filled with light again. Immediately, Malachite's complexion seems to become better. She seems to walk more easily. So too do the mercenaries following behind. It only lasts for a few hours. As past noon, the darkness immediately returns. The shadows stretch further and more irregularly, and Malachite begins to slow once again. Suddenly, Malachite's weapons are in hand as she turns to face a wall. She had just heard a noise of claws on stone, something rushing past her. But in the darkness, there is nothing. I think, Malachite makes a good point. This seems a fine enough spot for us to make camp for the evening, Rasmussen says. He begins to help Malachite to bed. I think, we'll have you asleep through the whole night, yeah? You seem to be in a bit of a state. And, I'll stay up with Perch here and we'll keep watch on everything. Malachite nods as she puts herself to sleep. The watch begins. Perch and Ras immediately stop looking out in the darkness and slowly make their way to Malachite's tent. Opening up, they both peer in and watch as Malachite begins to toss and turn and sweat. I think we need to get her up, Rasmussen says, as they both make their way into the tent and begin to try and wake Malachite again. And here, we will take a momentary recess. Allow me to reset my voice, get a drink of water, and ask you all, how are you guys doing? How are you enjoying the story so far, and what do you all believe is happening here? Are these memories haunting Malachite? Something worse? Just give in to Eric's voice. It will release you from matters such as gender. Eric's voice is a menace for my heterosexuality. Oh, Marcial, I'm so sorry to hear that. Since I don't know D&D well, did Rasmussen throw a dice when he slapped her? I think he did. I didn't make him, but it is kind of fun when people really want to... I fucking smack her. Do I get a roll for that? When you're asked, do I get to roll for that? More often than not, a DM will be like, hell yeah, roll to hit her. Let's see how hard this fucking smack is. Our ass got her pretty good. That's how she got up. So, who all still nice there? I'm nice and full. Hell yeah, darn ass. Had a stir fry, right? How are you all enjoying the story so far? Is anyone a bit concerned with what comes next? Or are you all excited to hear Malachite's next dream and what it might lead to? Nat 20, slap broker jaw. Hell yeah, hell yeah. You know what this story needs? This story needs more broken jaws. I agree. Rice and beans? Ah, gotcha, son. Asian stir fry. Okay, everybody's having dinner. Am I just the show that you all listen to at dinner time? I'm pretty okay with that, but I'm glad to hear. I'm very excited. Hell yeah. Well. Just give me a moment to sip a little water. As we begin the next part of our story and delve deep into Malachite's next dream, Malachite awakens in a familiar room with a familiar sight overhead. A stained glass window. A fancy room. No crib this time. She's simply standing at her full height. Her hands, the strong ones she knows, the weapons at her hips, ones she recognizes. Looking about, Malachite sees the door from the room, different again, more menacing than the last. In front of her stands a door, grayed with ash, burnt around its edges. The look of a building abandoned after a terrible fire. But she knows she must see. Walking forward, Malachite takes the door handle in hand and steps out into a city scarred by a deep fire. Malachite finds herself in the burnt quarter of Skittering, the city that she had left long ago after the fire had ripped its way through it. Not only that, but looking about, Malachite sees the bed of the man who had been the slaver of this town. His skeleton burnt to cinders in the metal frame of a fanciful bed. Malachite approaches it and stomps on the skull once, twice, 3 times, 12 times, 24. She turns the entire skeleton to a white powder. Suddenly a cold wind catches it and blows the skeletal meal through the ashes of the district. Malachite follows it until she finds it slowly resting in a small dust devil on a large, burnt wooden beam. Staring down, Malachite begins to hear screams. People caught in a fire, trapped, chains. Malachite reaches out and grabs the wooden beam and finds it burning her skin. She lifts it and underneath finds a trap door, tongues of flame lashing out around its sides, between the cracks, around the joints. She grabs the handles and feels the metal burn and melt the skin. As she draws the doors open, she looks down and sees an endless, deep pit. Flames licking upward, faces screaming in agony. The slaves, the dozens of innocents that were lost in this fire, scream up at her, begging for help. Looking deeper into it, Malachite finds herself freezing, leaning forward further and further until she is falling. As she falls into the pits, the screaming faces, the tongues of flame begin to morph into strange insect-like creatures. Dozens of them, hundreds of them, thousands crawling up this infinite pit, reaching out their claws, snapping at her feet, drawing at her, chittering away. They snash and bite and claw as Malachite feels her flesh being torn apart. Hands grip her shoulders, and a voice is screaming. Wake up. Malachite, I said to wake up! And she does. She finds herself sweat-soaked, dark, being shaken by Rasmussen.
Did you have a dream again?
Yes,
What was it?
they were insects, thousands of them, creatures gnashing. She seems lost for a moment. This might not be the right time to bring it up, Birch says. But one of the mercenaries was also having bad dreams.
You're just mentioning this now.
Rasmussen says. He gets up.
All right, we're waking everybody up. We're moving through the night. I don't like this. I don't like it at all. Things attacking us in our sleep. Monsters or something. Maybe nightmares, but this place is bad. And we're moving. No more sleeping. You all get that?
Perch and Malachite nod, as Malachite slowly, roughly begins waking herself up, rising from her bed. Perch and Ras begin moving about the party, waking up Pharaoh and Tortuga.
We're not sleeping here. We're getting everybody up. I have to say we're moving through night. If we can, we'll get a couple hours of sleep once the sun is up and filling the place, but we're not doing that now.
Everyone gathers as they begin moving to the mercenaries' tents. One by one, they begin waking them up, gathering them, till Rasmussen arrives at the tent of the man who had been having his own dark dreams.
Hey there. Are you awake?
Slowly, Rasmussen watches in the darkness of his tent as the man drifts upwards into a seated position, his head hanging low in clear exhaustion.
We're, getting everybody up. We've, got to move now.
All right, the man mutters, though he seems not to move from his spot. Rasmussen's nose is taken in by a sour smell of vomit. It seems this man had had some particularly bad dreams.
All right, we'll come check on you in a bit. Just get all your stuff packed up.
With that, Rasmussen draws back from the tent and helps everyone to start packing everything away. It is some minutes later, once everything is packed, save for the last couple of tents. Rasmussen looks around and realizes that the one man that had been slow to wake wasn't there.
Damn it. Malachite, could you get that last fella? He seemed to be having nightmares as well, so you could probably get him up and moving.
Malachite nods as she heads over to the last tent. Peering inside, she sees the silhouette of a man in a seated position, head drooped, like he fell asleep sitting up. We need to go, Malachite says. The man gives a very slow, laborious nod. Like right now, Malachite says. The man's face turns up towards her, his eyes reflecting light in the darkness. He gives out a strange, guttural groan. Malachite looks about and sees a pool of dark green vomit beside the man. She kneels down and enters into his tent, moving up to his face. His chins are sunken and hollow. Dark, black rings around his eyes. His skin seems stretched unnaturally. He seems lost in exhaustion, unable to keep his eyes fully open. No, you need to wake up. With that, Malachite draws her hand back and smacks the man with full force across his face. As she does, She feels a popping sound on her palm. Something seems to have torn. As she pulls her hand back, she looks at the man. As his jaw hangs loosely at an angle, dislocated horribly, the skin stretching downward as his jaw pulls away from his skull. She sees the flesh of his lips tearing. Pharaoh? I think I need you to heal someone, Malachite says, looking down at her hand. She seems to have shattered the man's jaw and is now distending, ripping away from it. As she turns back, she finds herself fighting the verge to vomit as the jaw continues to stretch downward to with a sickening sound. His entire lower jaw rips away, showing an open esophagus dripping with dark green ichor. Tortuga, outside the tent, looks down the road they'll be heading off as he prepares the horses to move. In the darkness, he sees a blur of motion. And suddenly, there's something in the road that was not there before. Tortuga looks about as he starts hearing scratching noises echoing up and down the gorge, chittering. Sounds begin to echo all about. Then there's a second figure, a bipedal creature with a wide head and clawed appendages. Then a third, a fourth. I don't think running's gonna be an option, Tortuga says. Pharaoh makes her way back to the tent that Malachite has ditched the elk from and peers inside. As she does, she sees the man, jaw on the ground, leaking a dark green ichor. A horrified Malachite stares on, when suddenly the exposed, dark bone of the man begins to twitch, and two massive mandibles unfurl themselves from his top teeth and start chittering. The head splits open. His eyes begin to rip away as they see a beetle-like mandibled face pull itself through the skull of the mercenary and lunge at the two of them, causing the tent to collapse. At the same moment, the creatures in the road begin to charge as the party is forced to roll for initiative. Now, these things seem interesting, but they don't seem nearly as bad as gene stealers. Well, it's hard to compare badness with 40k, isn't it? That is some very nice body horror. Oh, thank you, Marcia. I worked very hard on trying to bring these particular creatures to life. With a shout, Tortuga yells out to Rasmussen and Perch, "We've got friends here!" With that, all weapons are drawn as the three of them begin charging at the beetle-like creatures, dashing towards them. The tent is filled with a scuffle as it collapses, trapping in Malachite with the beetle-like creature that is beginning to tear at her, though she gets her blades free and begins to tear back. The mercenaries gather up their gear and form a tight circle behind the wagon as they look on, and the party begins to engage with these insect-like creatures. Tortuga dashes at the leading one, this black, beetle-like, bipedal thing, reaching out with its clawed hands. It runs at Tortuga. Just as they reach each other, he lashes out with his fist to crack the creature in the face. But it's gone. Suddenly he hears its footsteps behind him. Turning around, Tortuga sees the creature has teleported past him and is dashing into the camp, moving straight at Pharaoh and the mercenaries. What the? As he and Perch and Rasmussen turn around, two more of the creatures running at them teleport past the front line of these three and move into the camp, as another four of them slam into the fighters, caught by the sudden darting movements. The combat is rough as the fighters begin to realize these creatures' claws contain a venomous poison that, if it makes it into your bloodstream, causes you to seize up, become unable to move, and become easy prey. In the fighting, Birch finds himself at his strongest as the dark shadows begin to wrap around him. One of the creatures moves up and gives a chittering call in his face, something known to fill any creature with fear. As the creature stares on, the shadows wrap around Perch, and it hesitates for a moment. For this thing it begins to realize is not normal. Though this moment of realization lasts only shortly, as the creature is too distracted to see the head of the massive maw crack into its exoskeleton and spill its brains across the ground. Tortuga finds himself preoccupied, lashing out as two of the creatures flank to either side of him and stretch his reaction to its limits. The mercenaries are pressed against the wagon as two more of them begin lashing out, hiding behind their shields. They are forced into a defensive posture as these monsters are unnatural in every sense. Within the tent, the screamings and chittering of Malachite and the creature inside eventually grow silent. As Pharaoh dashes to the tent to try to find what has happened, she is too slow to react as one of the beetles slashes her across the back, pumping her full of their noxious poison. Pharaoh finds herself going stone still and falling to the ground. As she does, the creature grabs her ankles and begins dragging her across the gorge towards one of the stone walls. The mercenary leader breaks from their formation and runs at the creature, lashing out with his sword. "No, you will not be taken, no! That's one of ours!" As he runs and slashes at the creature, it drops Pharaoh for just a moment to plunge its dagger-like claw into the man's chest, pumping him full of the poison. He finds himself falling to the ground, paralyzed. But the creature has its prey. It turns back to Pharaoh and grabs her up in its claws, dragging her the rest of the way, moving closer and closer to the solid stone. Tortuga eventually, with the help of Rasmussen, is able to deal with the two that had them tied up and sees Pharaoh in her predicament. Rasmussen fires a crossbow bolt, catching the creature in its leg, slowing it for just a moment as Tortuga dashes across, barreling into the creature. He lashes out, his fists brushing against the exoskeleton. 1, 2, 3 strikes do not find purchase. With his fourth, he strikes the creature instead of in its body, in one of its antennae, seemingly stunning it just for a moment. As that happens, Perch dashes towards them, moving through the darkness in an unnatural fashion. He arrives and lashes out with his hammer. He gets one good strike, shattering one of the creature's arms, but it is still standing. Tortuga makes a tackling movement, catching its legs in his own, driving it to the ground, beneath the feet of Perch. And as it is unable to break free, it can only stare up as the hammer comes down, splattering its skull across the floor of the mountain pass. They watch as the last two beetle-like creatures look at what remains of their friends in the party, chitter in an intimidating call. They both run at a different stone wall. As soon as they arrive at it, though, they teleport into the dark caverns within. As the party hears the chittering sounds from within the wall, echoing from the peepholes they seem to have carved in. The creatures disappear, leaving the party horrified and only partially successful in their defense. With the creatures gone and the poison slowly fading from Pharaoh and the mercenary captain, everyone double times packing up the last few things. They will not be resting here with those things able to appear out of the stone wall at any moment, haunting their nightmares. Everyone prepares their stuff and gathers what remains of the splattered corpse of the man from which one of these creatures seemed to emerge. Packing into the wagon, the party begins heading out. Without any sleep at all, they know they will be quickly losing pace. But they will not be staying here for the night. Into the darkness, the party marches on, heading forward, hoping to be free of the dark creatures that stalk them. As night continues, they hear the chittering from the walls growing, the scratching claws moving after them. They're unable to get away from these creatures, whatever they are, though they seem disinterested attacking quite yet. Along the way, suddenly, the party is stopped, as Rasmussen's movements seem to grow sluggish, then still. Rasmussen wheels about and points into the darkness, blurredly saying, "Oh, no, you don't." Then suddenly, Rasmussen goes still and collapses to the ground, unconscious. The party dashes to his form, getting him into the wagon. They have to keep him moving. They cannot rest. They cannot try anything at this time. They're already stretched too thin as they begin marching into the darkness of early morning. It'll be some hours before the sun is overhead enough to scatter the shadows, and the creatures are drawing nearer. They're now a party member down. The mercenaries are too exhausted to be of much help, and everyone, including Pharaoh, are feeling too drained to perform many of their usual feats. Moving onward, Tortuga looks behind him and sees something foreboding down the mountain pass. A cloud of dust is being kicked up about an hour behind them. Something, or a large group of somethings, are chasing them along the roadway. "We've got to push on faster," Tortuga says, kicking the wagon into as much speed as he can. But Malachite, as drained as she is, soon finds herself starting to collapse. She cannot keep up this pace. They help her into the wagon, tell her that she should try to sleep. But now, with two people in the wagon, with everyone deprived of a good night's rest, they know they can't run for long. Eventually, Tortuga brings the wagon to a stop, as ahead of him, he sees three more of the beetle-like creatures in the road. "Looks like this is it," Tortuga says, stepping from the wagon. "Get anybody up that you can. We've got a fight on our hands." The chittering noises fill the walls around them, as Malachite, Pharaoh, Perch, and Tortuga stand about ready to defend the wagon and the mercenaries. Rasmussen, unconscious, unable to help. Eventually, the creatures start pouring from the walls. At least a dozen or more of these beings emerge, hungry, gnashing, eager. They begin moving into the field and engaging with the party in combat. It is a desperate fight, and they are slowly starting to turn some of these beetle-like creatures away. Though there's just a few too many of them. They're flanked, surrounded, and unable to fully defeat the last few of these beetles. Tortuga finds himself clawed, paralyzed. Pharaoh finds herself deprived of all magic. Perch is holding his own, but is slowly bleeding out hit points. Malachite is lashing out, but is feeling the exhaustion eating away at her. There are only 4 of the creatures left, surrounding the party, looking for their opening to grab someone and to dash into the stone with them. When in the distance, echoing hoofbeats can be heard. Turning back the way they came, the party sees a lone rider arriving down the road at full sprint. An elvish woman pushes her horse to exhaustion as she makes it into the ring of the beetles. She dives from their horse, looks about and says, "Well, I suppose the cavalry has arrived." Malachite looks at this woman, and her usual rough form says, "Who's this bitch?" "This bitch," the woman says, "is named Villandria. And I think you should take a nicer tone when someone is arriving with this." With that, the woman Villandria draws one of her blades and points it in a line at a pair of the beetle-like creatures as they turn towards this new arrival. A sudden, erupting gout of flame pierces forward from the tip of the blade, catching the skull of the first of these, burning through the exoskeleton, deep frying the brains and emerging out the back, cooking the second creature as well. In an instant, 2 of the remaining 4 of these monsters is slain by the new arrival. Villandria draws her second blade and points it at the other 2 beetles. "I could go again if you so wish." With that, the chittering creatures run towards the stone walls and disappear into them. "Well then, I believe we should all keep moving, don't you?" With that, Villandria sheaths her weapons, rises up onto her horse, and begins riding towards the head of the wagon. Looking about at the momentarily stunned fighters, exhausted and confused. Now, if you would prefer, unless you enjoy fighting those creatures." No. Yeah," Tortuga says. Woken from their daze, the party grabs what little they have, tosses it into the wagon, gathers the mercenaries, and begins the rapid dash through the mountain pass. They only have about a day's travel before they fully can leave it and will be free. But in their exhausted state, who knows if they'll be able to make it that far. With the party running into night, with the new arrival riding alongside them, and with these creatures chittering at their heels, I'm afraid that is where we will be calling story time for this evening. Now, I know we have quite a bit of time left, but there were also a few requests from people for things you would like to see at the end of today's stream. So, I will go ahead and start getting some of that set up. Let's see here. What did everybody think of today's story time of the horror that haunted in the night, these strange creatures, chittering, living nightmares. And what do you all think of the new arrival, Velombra? Damn, that was crazy. Hell yeah, Marcial. Thank you, thank you. Glad to hear you enjoy it. So, how's everyone else doing? What did everybody think of today's story time? And for the big question for today, does anyone have any predictions about what it was that the party faced today? What are these strange creatures that seem to haunt nightmares? The bodyguard was the peak of the stream for me. Hell yeah. No, honestly, one of my proudest sessions, if I'm being totally out there, it was so cool being able to do some like backstory stuff with the nightmares, but also bring out the horror of what these monsters are, because everything that happened is actually a PHB monster in D&D. None of this was made up by me. I might have embellished the horror dreams a bit and brought a horrific flavor to how these creatures reproduce. But these are a monster that already existed, and one I simply flavored a little bit. Any guesses? Any thoughts? Anyone know of the horrors of these creatures from the Feywild? What the party faced are the horrific beings known as Meanlocks. Dreaded creatures of the Feywild, created by embodiment of the feeling of terror. Meanlocks are insectoid-like creatures. They possess claws that can paralyze, an aura of fear around them that messes with creatures' minds. But most importantly, they are telepathic tormentors. Meanlocks possess no form of communication other than telepathy. They can use it to project unsettling hallucinations into the minds of their prey. These hallucinations take the form of terrible whispers or fleeting movements just at the edge of one's peripheral vision. During the day, Meanlocks confine themselves to their dark warrens. At night, they crawl from their tunnels to torment sleeping prey, particularly those who seem to embody all that is good in the world. Meanlocks like to paralyze their creatures with their claws, drag them to their hidden dens, beat them unconscious, and telepathically torment them over a period of hours. Any humanoid creature that succumbs to the psychic torment undergoes a transformation into an evil, full-grown Meanlock. Yes, these beings torment creatures in their dreams, giving them horrific nightmares that can eventually turn them into Meanlocks. Horrific, terrifying, and oh, so terrific to describe the nightmares they cause. But, that is the end of today's story time. Oh, Meanlock. I forgot that's what those guys are called. I never have a chance to get to use them on one of my games. What do you think, Crazy Seth? After getting a bit of an idea of what they can do you like them? Do you want to inflict them on somebody? Because honestly, these have been one of the most fun creatures to use. They're level 2, which means they aren't actually super combative, but given the right setting, given the right build-up, they can be utterly horrific to observe. Now. Let's think. I think there were two things everybody wanted to see at the end of today's stream. The first of which is from one of our favorite boys in chat. So, Necromorph meets Freddy Krueger. To a degree, yeah. But, Marciel, I'm going to show off a little something of yours. If everybody could direct their attention to the screen, I would like to show everybody the Accorded Dragon, a little creation by our resident artist and pun master, Marciel. A cross between, I'm going to say, is that a gold or brass dragon and an accordion? Look at this little boy. Aww. Given some bellowing powers, doesn't he? What do y'all think? You people like Marciel's little boy? I'll add more later, but I'm exhausted. No problem, Marciel. No problem at all. But, I do think there was one little thing that we had left behind. A teaser, if I am right. Were you all honestly interested in having a stream where I spent some time looking at my custom-built language? It's a bit of a crazy thing, in my opinion, to spend some time looking at a fake language I created and all the different rules and stuff I came up for, just because at a point that seems to turn almost into a language lesson, which I would hate to inflict on you guys. But I think I'll prepare a poll, as now is a good time to prep for next weekend's stream, with a little bit of a question. Do you guys want to spend half a story time learning Scarpy? Perhaps yes, perhaps no, or perhaps why not a whole stream? Let's see if I could get that up. There we go. Inflict the language. It looks cool. Add a bit more lore. The first comment on Twitter. Now, to stare at fake language. Hell yeah. So I got a poll up. You guys tell me kind of what you think. Do you guys want to spend like half a stream looking at a fake language? Do you guys want me to commit a whole stream to it? Or are you guys also thinking like I'm thinking? Just a whole time looking at a language lesson, even if it is a fantasy language, is a bit much. That I can definitely understand. Would hate to do something y'all would find yourselves getting a little bored with. We've got a couple minutes and a poll is up. So if anybody's out there and wishes to save themselves, now is the time to vote. Now is the only time to vote. I know we've got quite a few of you out in chat. The poll is ready and waiting. Send those losers to school so they can speak. All right. Well, if we end up having a yes, then I'll probably be spending the last 10 minutes of stream giving you guys a bit of a teaser, explaining the context of why we have ourselves this little language to look at, the goals I had kind of wanted to hit with it, and a tiny teaser of the language itself. Let's see where the vote will be. Only about 30 seconds left, everybody. Better hurry and vote, for we are running out of time. If you wish to have your voice heard, we are done. Gods, really? Well, alrighty then. I guess we're definitely doing a teaser, but next stream, it seems we will not be having a story time. Instead, we will be taking a look at a little bit of a language that I have made. A fantasy language made from scratch in certain ways, though highly inspired by other things. Today, we'll take just a momentary look at a little something called Scarpa, the language of the Scarpi. But before we fully dive into the language, a moment of lore, if you would. Far to the south of the world lies a massive archipelago, a collection of hundreds upon hundreds of islands. These are called the Scarpi Islands, or in their native tongue, the Scarpi Eari. These are populated by a very war-focused group of people called the Scarpi Vaders. It was nearly 1,000 years ago when the first raiders from Scarpi appeared. Men and women coming by longship, raiding every coast, every river they could find, engaging in combat and warfare, then disappearing into the unmappable mess of islands to the far south. These people spoke their own language, had their own culture, and seemed untied to anywhere in the world. Their language bore very strong similarities to common, so much so that some words could be picked out, but their original pronunciation and meaning seems to have been blurred or lost in some respects. That language is called Scarpa, and has been a long-term project of mine to design a language to fit the goal that I had, to have a fantasy language, one that I had made myself and was strongly inspired by Old English and Old Scandinavian, blending the two together to create a language that one can almost understand, one that sounds really familiar to English speakers. Like one or two words or the way a word sounds seems right, but you can't actually just automatically translate it. With this language, I started with a few words that I kind of like the sound of, and from there I kind of built out what the language was made of. Here we can see it currently possesses about 8 vowels, 13 consonants, which combined with those 8 vowels make 21 unique sounds. And here I lay out a few of their special linguistic rules. An AE making the long I sound, an EI making the long A. So we have I, A. The double G representing a ying sound, or the ing sound for English speakers, where the single G will represent y. Here we have the U sound, A, or E. So I, A, ying, y, U, E, A, and E. So E and E. We can Scarpa. Speak common. Oh, be quiet, you mean the language. And here we have the consonants. Most of them are pretty general, as you can see here, with a couple of exceptions towards the bottom, with G and H kind of representing a singular sound of gh, and with K and L also representing the k sound. Something that's a bit derisive of the Tlingit language, a sound that is done with the tongue in the back of the throat, a k sound. It's a bit odd, but also adds a bit of flavor to some of the words. And for our little teaser, and I'll try to give it the full length, I think many of us recognize this by our time on YouTube. An old Viking poem. Of my mother told me someday I would buy galley with good oars, sail to distant shores. Stand upon the bow, noble bark I steer. Steady course for the haven, too many foemen. A very simple one. Something that holds a natural interest to the languages I am trying to pull. And here we can see kind of the version I have made. The version that relies heavily on the Scarpy's own language of me hive moody spake fear, ein thy fear who veil, call thy hive heis fear ora, sail kin var lenging, race hike and corbal, hace fair skip fair sail, through curse ken curva lenging, Vinja uit utlanger. Vinja uit utlanger. The language is meant to kind of hold that strong sound of being kind of Scandinavian based, a little like Viking sounding to it, while possessing some unique sounds to it as well. With it, there are some obvious words I wanted to grab. The mainlander, what they refer to everyone else in the world. Here we can see the EI making the long A sound, May, G making the Y sound, main, Langinger, Langinger, mainlander. A stranger or outlander making the ut, Langinger. And of course, a fun little last piece I'll share with you all is where the term raider in my world comes from. What it comes from is an old Scarpy word meaning fish or fishing, a vater. And so people who went land raiding or lengingvater were actually a kind of euphemism the Scarpy liked to use for fishing on land, basically looking for valuables or supplies on land instead of in the water. Those people were called land fishermen or langavators, which, as you can imagine, as the people who spoke common heard the word langavator, they would eventually turn it into land raider, pulling it away from its original meaning of land fisher. But, I will just be doing a very slow scroll, allowing you all to take in some of what is here. I don't want to spend too much time if I'm going to have to do 2 hours of breaking some of this down. But I think you all will enjoy this nice scrolling teaser as I come to the end of today's story time, today's stream, and wish you all a good night, a happy Sunday, and say I would like to see you all next weekend, both for the next part of Mass Effect and for our next Dungeons and Dragons stream, where we will be looking even deeper into the language of the Scarpy, learning some of their culture, some of their sentence structure, and come to the decisions, or learn a bit about how I went about building my own fantasy language. And it looks like if we do get to the bottom of this and have a lot of time to waste, I do on my Scarpy linguistics page have a bit of a massive lore dump on their culture. As you can see, the Scarpy were a project of passion for me. And if anybody ever is making a setting and would like to steal them after our next stream, I encourage you to do such. Wait, this is the end? Damn it, I keep getting late. I'm sorry, Vulcan. I always stream from 5 to 7 PST, and I try to keep myself on schedule as much as possible. I'm sorry to hear that's not lining up very well, but don't worry. The VOD will always be available for 15 days, and from Monday to Tuesday, I make sure to post up all of my Dungeons and Dragons streams in my archive, which you can find here. So if you ever need to catch up, please feel free to watch through the archive. Heading out to work, have a good stream. Well, this is where we're ending, Xenaku. So I will be wishing all of you a good night. And I hope to see you all again. Do I have a good phrase here? I'll have to think of a good outro and Scarpy for you all. But good snacht, and see you next time. Bye bye.